Hello knitters, welcome back to my channel, Rena Knits. So, you want to know how to knit. You want to knit. You want to help others, you want to knit for your family, you want to knit for yourself. But where do you actually begin? What do you actually need to knit? Just the basics, because there's so many things out there. There's so many neat stuff out there to help you knit. But do you actually need all of those? Keep watching as I discuss the basics, the basic items that you would need for knitting. In this video, I talk about the very basics when you're starting off as a beginner. So let's say if you want to make a scarf or a blanket, the basics that you would need. And if you want to make a hat, well, you can make it with straight needles or circular needles. So I talk about those as well. But then, as you get more advanced, as you challenge yourself more and making items that are a little more complicated, you would need a few additional items. And I mentioned those as well. So definitely check this video out to see what you would need to make knitting fun and easy. When you're starting off knitting, there are only a few basic things you need to get. Now, you don't have to worry about getting the full knitting package or getting everything to make it perfect. You just need to start knitting and just start with the basics. So today, I'm going to show you some of the basics that you can have and alternates depending on what project you are starting with. In terms of basics, you need yarn, you need needles, and that's pretty much it. But to make things a little easier and for completion, you need place markers, needles to finish things off, a stitch holder, and a tape measure. I have two types of yarn that I'm going to show you. Both are from Red Heart. Why I chose Red Heart is because it's one of the yarns that easily found in pretty much all stores. So even if you go to Walmart or a dollar store, you could find Red Heart. The difference between these two Red Hearts is the weight of the yarn. Now, if you're planning on making something for a little baby or an infant, I would choose either a yarn that is number 2 in terms of weight or number 5. Now, number 2 is more finer and softer, but number 5 is also soft, but it's a little more bulkier. So the heavier the weight, the bulkier the yarn, so therefore it's good to use for making items for winter. So like a hat or a bulky scarf or a bulky blanket or even a big bulky sweater. So number 5 is good for that. Number 2 is more fine. So if you want to make something that's like a spring hat or an autumn hat or a kind of like a light sweater or a light blanket, that's the weight of the yarn that you would choose. This particular weight is number 4. Now this is good for pretty much anything where you're like a first time beginner and wanting to knit, because with this yarn it's more closer together. It's not as bulky, but it's not as fine, so each stitch will seem separate and easier to pick up when you're knitting. So this particular yarn, the weight of this yarn is a lot easier to knit with, no matter what you're trying to knit. So that's why this particular yarn is good for that. I usually go with needle sizes that are 7 and up, especially when you're beginning to knit, because they're a little more thicker and you're able to have fewer stitches to make a particular item. So if you're making a hat or a scarf, you would need fewer stitches simply because the needle size is bigger, so it will cover a lot more when you're knitting, and they're easier to handle. Now, whether you choose metal, plastic, or wood as your needle material, that is up to you in terms of preference, what you're more comfortable with. If you're a beginner, I would go with metal simply because they're cheaper, they're easily found everywhere. Bamboo material needles and plastic needles are not that easily found everywhere. I would go with straight needles because they're better to handle. If you're making a hat, if you use straight needles to make a hat, definitely check out the video that I posted on that. But with this, then, if you're using straight needles for a hat, you would need stitching needles to finish it off as well. So that's the one thing that you have to be careful about. Now, if you are willing to try, then having one circular needle is also good. Now, I would choose the smaller size, so 16-inch with US size 7 and up again is good. Now the 16-inch, because it's less circular, so therefore making smaller hats is a lot easier, or even bigger hats is a lot easier because all the stitches will be close by and you don't have to worry about kind of like getting all your stitches in one place and being able to work them. So therefore, using a 16-inch circular needle with a US size 7 and up is also a good thing to start off, especially if you're thinking of making hats. Place markers are good, especially if you're thinking of making designs, or even when it comes time for decreasing and you need to know where you are in terms of your place within your row. Place markers is good to have. Place marker is basically something you would stick in there that would tell you where you are. You could buy place markers that you could find easily. If you don't want to do that, I usually sometimes use this if I don't have place markers handy. And if I don't have that available, I basically take a bit of yarn, make a little loop like this at the end, and use this as a place marker. So anything that will tell you where you are within your row, but will not kind of like disappear within the stitches either, can be used as a place marker. But it also, you have to also make sure that it doesn't come in the way when you're knitting as well. Needles for stitching. Now, because it's yarn, it's thicker, so you want to choose a needle that is a little thicker, so not just stitching needles would work, and that has a bigger hole at the end where you could be able to put your yarn through. So that's the one thing that you have to consider. So these definitely you can find in any store, and you definitely want one that's thick with a big hole at the end so that you could stick a yarn through. Why I said a tape measure, simply because you need to know how big of the item that you're making. So everything has a measurement, so you need, for example, if you're choosing to make a woman's hat, you know it needs to be 6.25 inches long, so you need to be able to measure that. You need to be able to measure the blanket size. So basically a measuring tool, so you know how long, when you need to stop knitting. Why I said you need a stitch holder is simply because if you're making a sweater, or if you're making any design that requires a few stitches to be put aside, even like if you're doing a cable design, you need 3 stitches or 4 stitches to be put aside. So a neckline, an arms on a sweater, you need to be able to hold some stitches on the side. You would need this. These are the items that you would need to start knitting. Now, in the beginning, if you're just beginning to knit, you just need the basics, which is yarn and needles. But as you get more adventurous and challenge yourself, then you would need to start adding items in. So then you would need to start adding place markers or circular needles, and then the stitch needles. You definitely always need the measuring tape, but then you could also start adding in the stitch holder. So as you get more adventurous, you'd start needing more material, but basically these are the only items you would need for any project that you decide on knitting. If you want to see more such videos, definitely don't forget to subscribe. If you like this video, hit that like button. And any comments are always welcome, so definitely write those down. Until next time, relax, enjoy, and keep knitting.